All right, we have a very special guest on the show today. He's been on this show before, as many of you know. He is the mayor of our great city, Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson. Welcome to the show. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing fine. How are you doing?
I'm good. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the themes that you spoke about in your State of the City address. But there was one thing I just watched your press conference, and there was one thing you talked about that really stood out to me. And we were having the conversation about poverty in the city and how to address that. And you talked about what needs to be done, and you talked about in terms of what other ethnic groups have had to deal with and stuff like that. Can you just, for our audience, reiterate that point that you made? Because I thought it was a really, really important point.
Well, it boils down to, all of the things that, and I'll get to it, all the things that people are complaining about, and rightfully so, such as crime, violent crime, drug addiction, poverty, all these kind of things. People are pointing out, what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about that? And so we do things in order to help address that. But none of those things will be sustainable or have any substantial impact unless we deal with the underlying issues of institutionalized inequities, disparities, and racism. And so when people talk about these things around violent crimes, homicides, robberies, they talk about drugs and guns, and they talk about the poverty. In general, if you listen to them, they don't say it, but they're really talking about Black people. And so what my point to them was that every ethnic group that has come to America has gone through this cycle, living in ghettos, in substandard housing conditions, overcrowded tenement houses. They were the people who sold the drugs or engaged in crime. They did all those kinds of things, and they were the population that was impoverished. And they were that way because in some way they were discriminated against, even though they were white, and even in general, they were discriminated against because of what white person they were, whether they were Southern or Eastern European as opposed to Western European or Northern European, you see. And so not until these groups became fully assimilated into America, where they had complete access to quality of life and prosperity, where they had the ability to get a decent education, to wind up owning businesses. They became the doctors, the lawyers, the judges, all these other kind of professional people, the business people. And over a period of time, they were completely assimilated into the American society and culture, and they were no longer part of the poverty. They were no longer part of crime. They were no, but for Black people, that has not been the case. We still suffer from institutionalized inequity, disparity, and racism, and it's a generational thing that's gone on for hundreds of years. And as a result of that, we're in perpetual poverty. We're in perpetual engagement in negative activity that's harmful to communities, families, and the individual in terms of crime, drug addiction, and all these other kind of negative social indicators. So until such time as our society addresses this institutionalized inequity, disparity, and racism, and allow for full access of people to the prosperity and quality of life of America, you're always going to have crime, drugs, and poverty in our community. So the key here is not the problem with the people, although people make decisions, but that's not the main issue. The main issue here is that we have failed to deal with this institutionalized inequity, disparity, and racism. Until such time we deal with that, we're going to continue to have these problems. And it is escalating, and they have less ability to control it than they've had in the past.
Mm-hmm. And you talked also briefly on the press conference about the difference between how people try to address these issues with charity and welfare versus giving full access. Can you talk a little bit about what the difference is?
Well, that's part of the problem, that when they look at us, or they look and they say, well, they take the approach of that we're a charity case or we are a welfare case. Well, as long as you're a charity case and a welfare case, you're not going anywhere, because you're limited in terms of what you can and are allowed to do. Until such time as we are allowed full access to prosperity, full access to the ownership of businesses and the delivery of goods and services, full access to inexpensive capital to start businesses and to maintain and expand our business. Until we have full access to these things that help to produce quality of life and jobs for people, until such time, then we will continue to be in these negative indicators. And again, the welfare and charity approach has been the one that's been able to tap things down in the past. It doesn't work anymore. I don't care how much welfare they give. I don't know how charitable they feel. They're not stopping this. These dudes out there are serious about what they do, and they have no qualms about what they're doing in terms of crime and violent crime. And if that's their, just like other groups that come to America, they've engaged in drug dealing and prostitution and gambling and all those illicit and illegal activities in order to gain what they believed was some wealth and some power, but they did it through illegal means.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson. At your State of the City address, you talked about this game not being a game for the weak, and how you can't be naive in your approach. Can you talk a little bit more about that and kind of expand on that a little bit?
Well, if you listen to the State of the City, as I said, all of what I talked for about 40 minutes about the various things that I talked about, and that was only like in 5 categories, and 5 categories, and then many more than that to run a city, and it is only a portion of each category. And I was able to talk for 40 minutes just on that, and I was only talking about a small portion of it, right? Mm-hmm. So how you think you're gonna come and be able to hit the ground running and be able to do what is necessary to just be successful at this, let alone create a great city, just to be successful. It's not going to happen if you're naive and you come here with points of view that have no practical application to the reality of this. because this is not an academic exercise. You know, I have various degrees. I have associates, a bachelor's, a master's, and a law degree. And I had to read the books because I didn't know what the heck they were talking about. So I had to read the books in order to get through the stuff, right? And so I read this stuff. But also in reading it, I recognized that if you applied this stuff, particularly with black people, if you applied this stuff to your personal life or to your life or your community, you ruin your life and you ruin your community. It's because it's not practical. It's not applicable. But I needed to learn this stuff to get the grade, right? And so I gave them what they wanted, the answer they wanted, but I didn't mean that I believed that stuff. And so what happened was, if you're coming out of that mindset of this philosophical point of view is going to be the panacea, this ideology or political ideology or philosophy is going to be the panacea, and you actually believe that, and you come here and you try to execute and implement that, you're in for a rude awakening. It ain't happening. Why? Because the system doesn't operate that way. The system is still what it is. And if you are able to achieve some of that stuff, you're only going to be able to achieve it as the system allows you to achieve it, to continue the institutionalized inequity, disparity, and racism. So what you're trying to defeat is what you actually causing to happen. So you can't come to this naive. You know, as I said, everybody can't do this, and that's why I'd say the dudes on the street, you really should be here. You're wasting your time out there. Yeah, you may get some quick gratification in terms of money and some recognition and stuff, but that stuff is temporary. You wind up dead or in penitentiary behind that stuff. If you want to have some long-range, sustainable wealth and access to influence and power, you're going to have to engage and bring what you know on the street into this game, and it's not that much different in the methods. I mean, it's not that much difference in the game. It's just the methods that they use. You can't use that method here. But the game is the same. But if you have somebody coming who's naive about all of this and just believe that this is Mayberry, and that other program I saw one time, Pleasantville, you in for a rude awakening, man. Rude awakening. They'll eat you up alive.
Right.
You up alive.
We're talking with Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson, and I know we're starting to wind down here because I know you have a hard stop in about 15 minutes. You talked a little bit in the press conference as well about your views on the controversial police bill called Issue 24.
Right.
Talk a little bit about
your views. Issue 24 is a charter amendment, and a charter amendment supersedes all laws of the city of Cleveland. It's like the charter is like the Constitution of the city of Cleveland, and then when you amend the charter, is like amending the Constitution. So it supersedes and overrides all laws. And if the laws if you have laws on the book that are contrary, or process and procedures that are contrary to that charter amendment, they wipes them out, right? So again, this goes back to naivety. Here are people who are being manipulated because they're naive to believe that if they put in effect this charter amendment and have a civilian control over the entire police department, that in some kind of way Mayberry and Pleasantville is going to materialize and people just going to behave the right way. It is not going to happen. It is a deliberate attempt to take away the authority of the police chief, who happens in this case to be a black man, Chief Williams, and shift that authority in the process of hiring police officers, and the civil service process of how do you give a test and grade them and pick them, and how do you discipline them? How do you, who gets fired? Who gets this? All that stuff is taken out of the hands of the Division of Police and Civil Service and put in the hand of this Civilian Police Commissioner Board, who has almost a totalitarian authority to do whatever it wants in terms of changing any of these processes and procedures, because they believe it to not to be what they think it should be, based on, again, then there's some political ideology or some philosophy, even to the point that they have the authority, as I understand it, that they have the ability to terminate anyone who does not cooperate with them, who's a city employee. Well, what does that mean? Well, what are you, a dictator? And so you have the authority to terminate, and it doesn't say, if you says, it says it's city employee. So I'm assuming if I'm a city employee, that means a mayor too, or a councilman. So if you don't agree with them, or if you don't cooperate with them in some kind of way, in which they have yet to define, then they have the authority to fire you. In complete contrary to civil service laws, collective bargaining agreements, all these kind of things that we have in place to protect employees and also create due process for not only the employees, but for the system itself, so that it has some fairness associated with it. So they claim, and then they can adopt policy. They can make whatever policy they want in regards to the police department. They can eliminate this training and say, we got to have that training over there. So what do you need a chief for? What authority would a chief have if you were a police officer and there's nothing he can do to you? What authority do you have over him?
Right.
You see, so these kind of, this is a disaster. And you remember out in Portland?
Yeah.
When they were doing the civil unrest? They had riots almost every day, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
Demonstration for over a year, every day almost, right? That's what this brings. Here in Cleveland, we had a civil unrest one day. That was it. And we instituted curfews, and we did all the things that we needed to do in order to bring the thing to a halt. But we would not have that ability, because then this civilian board or commission would then come in and tell everybody what they have to do. You fail to cooperate with them, then you can get fired. And not only that, I know that there's, this whole issue of defunding the police. That sounds good. And I know the intent there was to divert money into other preventive measures, which we have done. But at the same time, you can't ask to address violent crime, solve homicides and robberies, and then defund the police so that you have fewer police officers on the street and less detectives. So on one hand, they say to us, well, you need more homicide detectives. Okay, fine. But you need to defund the police. Now, how does that work? How does that work?
Right.
So you have, it's this kind of mentality, and it goes back to that naivety that's grounded in academic exercises and political philosophy. And those people who have certain political philosophy, they use the legitimate issue of the oppressed, and in this case, Black people, to promote their politics, not to assist the oppressed. They just use the oppressed for their own benefit. That's all that's about. And that's the issue 24. It should vote no.
Yeah, I've referred to exactly what you're talking about as people manipulating Black trauma.
That's all it is. A tragedy pimps. What they are. They take our tragedy and they pimp it to their own benefit, as if they care. Get out my face. Get out my face.
We're talking with Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson. I know we have a couple of minutes left. We talked about, obviously, the issues with issue 24 and the relation to the police and stuff like that. And part of before you go there, but let me mention, that's why we entered into a consent decree. And that's why I asked for a consent, the Department of Justice come here, and why we entered into a consent decree, so that we could have some look at a systematic and a holistic reform of the police department, and put in an agreed upon training and agreed upon tactics and techniques and agreed upon accountability for discipline on use of force, excessive force, all this other kind of stuff. So I believe that a police department needs to have training and discipline and accountability, all those things. And that's why we brought the Department of Justice in order to help us with that, so that we can make real institutional reform in the police department. This stuff they talking about, though, is crazy. And I wonder, and obviously we've all been having a conversation about, police relations with the community and stuff like that. And I haven't heard anyone ask this, so I'm really curious to know your thoughts on this. I wonder if we used to have in the city of Cleveland, we used to have a residency requirement where you had to live in the city of Cleveland. I wonder if that being removed has also contributed to the disconnect, because now officers no longer have to live in the city in which they serve.
Well, and according to that law, no city employee has to live in the city of Cleveland. And let me tell you how that materialized, and then I'll answer your question. That again, remember during the press conference, they were talking about term limits. And I was saying, well, if you want term limits, that's another example of term limits, where the police unions throughout the state of Ohio lobbied them, and they agreed to pass this law saying that you could not have forced people to live in your city as a condition for employment, right? And the police did that. These unions, the statewide people did that, statewide union people, with the understanding that they would not be opposed to them instituting all of these gun laws, or eliminating all of our gun laws. So you had a double effect. Not only don't they have to live in the city of Cleveland, but now you don't have any gun laws that we can pass governing the responsible gun ownership. So it was a double effect there, and that's what people don't understand. All right, and that was the deal cut. So now, has it been detrimental? Of course, if you have to live somewhere, you have a vested interest in the condition of the environment in which you have to live in, and your family has to live in, right? So that is always going to be a benefit. That's always going to be a benefit. But in addition to that, having people who understand an urban environment is always better for police relationship because everything that happens out on the street is not as crucial as a suburban person may think it is. Because if you come from a non-urban environment, you know, these young dudes out there, they walking hard, they talking hard, but they ain't gonna bust a grape, a lot of them, right? And so here it is, if you listen to their language and their body language and verbal language and the way they dressed and all this other kind of stuff, you'd be scared to death because they're about ready to do something. But if you understand that culture and you come from an urban environment, then you are able to discern who's real and who ain't real. Well, these suburban people can't do that. And so having people understand an urban culture really goes a long way in helping to de-escalate a situation so that a young kid don't wind up getting arrested for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest and assault upon a police officer. Why? Because the kid was behaving like the culture behaved, and a police officer took that as a threat to him or her, and they acted in a way that escalated the situation rather than de-escalating. Mm-hmm. So yes, it helps. It helps. It helps because it helps you know the culture, and it also creates a vested interest for the police officer for the environment they live in.
Mm-hmm. All right, Mr. Mayor, I know we have to let you go. So once again, thank you so much for spending time with us and being gracious with your time with us. I said it on social media. Anytime we've called, you've been there. You've never ran from any question, even the tough ones. You've always been honest and transparent. So I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate you. Thank you very much.
All right.